Hola, muy buenos días. Antes de dar
Good
inicio,
morning. Before we begin our event today, for everyone who is here on Zoom, I want to let you know that we have simultaneous interpreting, Spanish-English and English-Spanish. So you just need to click on the interpreting button on the lower part of your screen and pick whichever language you prefer.
I inform that we have interpretation available in Spanish, English, and English-Spanish for the participants in the Zoom platform. You just have to go to the interpretation at the bottom of your screen and select the language of your preference. Sean todas bienvenidas y bienvenidos a la conferencia.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our online conference titled Innovation Experiences in Financing for Actors in the Agri-Food System, Investing in Transformation with Inclusion, organized by the FAO Regional Office for Latin America and the Caribbean. Before we start this activity, I'm going to ask our panel members who are on the Zoom platform to please keep your microphones on silent, but you can leave your cameras on so we can see you. We are also letting you know that this conference is being broadcast in real time on the FAO YouTube channel, the Twitter channel, and the FAO platform for Latin America and the Caribbean in both English and Spanish. So we invite you to leave us your comments about this conference on Twitter using the hashtags Sistema Alimentario, COVID-19, and Sistemas Agroalimentarios. Finally, please remember that you can ask us questions and comments on our YouTube platform. And to the extent possible, we will select some of those questions and comments to bring up for our Q&A at the end of the session. The objective of this conference today is to share a regional view of the relevance of financial inclusion. We are going to hear some relevant experiences about instruments, sources, and innovative strategies in the realm of investment financing and working capital for actors involved in the agri-food system who are facing challenges to access this sort of credit. We had planned to invite our Assistant Director General and FAO Regional Rep for Latin America and the Caribbean, Mr. Julio Verdeguer, to offer some remarks. Unfortunately, he's had a scheduling issue and he's not going to be able to be here with us at the beginning. So for the opening remarks, I'm inviting Joan Timi, who's our Regional Policy Officer, and we will be hearing some opening remarks about Mr. Verdeguer's view and a welcome to this session. So Jean, are you there with us? Hi, Dulclair. You've got 10 minutes, Jean. Thank you so much, Dulclair. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's an enormous pleasure to be here with all of you participating in this activity. It's truly a topic that is really relevant and important for the time we're living in. And on behalf of the FAO and the regional office of the FAO, I want to thank our guests for accepting the invitation from the FAO to participate in this debate. It's a topic that we think is extremely salient. At the FAO, we've developed several regional initiatives to facilitate SMEs and MSMEs and family farming groups and youth and women and original peoples, and to make it easier for them to access public banking and private banking or any other financing mechanism available that is going to enable them to develop their economic activity and their business in this context. It's very important for us to remember that there are enormous gaps in this sphere. We know that there are very few farmers in our region who are able to access public and private banking services for rural loans. It is not simple to get credit, and there are so many requirements placed upon them. So the FAO has called and asked and discussed with the governments and with private entities as well to find mechanisms to change that situation. We know that we are not talking about facilities, we are talking about rights, we're talking about more inclusive mechanisms that are going to bring these farmers into the fold to make it easier for them to access the credit they need to develop their business and commercial activity. And with that said, we know that the gender gap is still big. We know that the challenges that women face are enormous, and women are even more impacted by the pandemic. We know that it's a very critical topic that we must face. And we also need to set up partnerships with the partners who are here. It's going to be a very important activity when we are facing those gaps. We know that the history of the region in terms of inclusive policies to bring these groups into the fold is very important. And when it comes to financing instruments or other credit instruments, there has not been a lot of tools or a lot of initiatives. These initiatives that we do have need to be scaled up throughout the region, and they need to be more widely available, and they need to, above all, make it possible to confront the negative fallout, both socially and economic, of the pandemic in rural societies. There are thousands of farming cooperatives and associations and MSMEs that are suffering severe impacts from the pandemic, and this conversation today is an opportunity to introduce initiatives that are going to be really impactful, really relevant, and can truly make a difference and serve as inspiration for all of us who are working on policies for financial and economic inclusion. I want to once again thank everybody for being here. We've got a representation of Rabobank in Chile. We've also got the Cooperative for Credit from Brazil, Cresol. Thank you so much for being here with us. We've got INDAP from Chile, the Institute of Agricultural Development. So we've got the public sector experience here with us, and we're also hearing from the Latin American Association of Financial Institutions for Development called ALIDE, which is here with us. So we're going to hear 4 experiences, 4 different types of initiatives from 4 different backgrounds and viewpoints that are going to help us get inspired and find ideas to work on this topic. Once again, on behalf of the FAO, we are fully committed to make sure that this health crisis can be overcome and does not turn into an economic and financial crisis. We are aware of the limitations facing governments. We know there are public budget issues. We also know that in the private sector, there is difficulties to confront the situation with more creativity, more innovation, more technology, more digitalization to reduce costs and make it possible to close the existing gaps. Again, on behalf of the FAO, it is a very important opportunity to talk about this today, and we don't want it to end here. We want this to be a starting point, an opportunity for inspiration and motivation to allow everyone present here to expand their knowledge about these systems, and in so doing, confront those limits and make partnerships, public and private synergies in all of the countries, and to find mechanisms to confront these challenges. The FAO wants to say thank you to everyone for attending today, and we hope you have a great conversation, and we hope it serves as inspiration these days. Claire, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. The floor is yours again. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much, Zhao. in the context of climate change that we are facing, with the accelerated degradation of natural resources, with the persistence of poverty, with lagging productivity in Latin America and the Caribbean, on top of which we are facing the aftermath and consequences of COVID-19, we are seeing a region that is facing a challenge to transform its agricultural and food systems into more productive, sustainable, and resilient models to continue being a pillar of food and nutritional security and to reduce poverty around the world, and to confront all the other problems that we are facing in our region, as Zhao has mentioned. And that, of course, includes a wide range of challenges, but also opportunities. We must keep in mind at all times that there's an ethical imperative. No one can be left behind. We cannot allow the recovery to widen the gaps that we already have in our region. And that is why it is essential to have financing, investment with linkages between public and private efforts in an innovative fashion to ensure recovery with transformation in the wake of the current health, economic, and social crisis. So we now have a conversation ahead of us, and we are going to hear an overall viewpoint of the regional situation about financial inclusion in the rural world and the agri-food world. And I'm going to ask Romy Calderon. Mr. Calderon is the leader of the Economic Studies and Reporting Unit at ALIRE, which is the Latin American Association for Financial Institutions for Development. Mr. Calderon, thank you so much for being here. And Mr. Calderon, the floor is yours. You have 15 minutes to present. And when you've got 3 minutes left, I am going to let you know. Thank you so much. So while I get my presentation up, thank you to the FAO for inviting me. After quite some time, we're meeting again at a joint activity. I think our last with FAO Chile or the region was perhaps back in 2010, and with a Peruvian institute led by Carolina Trivelli, who's also here today. So I'm happy to see her here too. I want to say hi to everyone who's here with us. I know some of you, I don't know all of you, but it's great to see all your faces, and I hope you're all doing well. When we talk about agriculture, I think this brings us back to a very important saying that I always like to begin to get a kind of a historical viewpoint, and it's motivating for me, from Victor Hugo, the French writer, used to say about the future that it had 3 faces, or 3 readings. One for the weak, the unattainable, one for the moderate, and for the brave, opportunity. And so here we can apply that to agricultural topics as well, and to our daily activities or to our entrepreneurial activities or our undertakings. I think we're in a very interesting time in terms of the agricultural sector and what we're facing as a result of the pandemic. We've had to rethink how it works as a strategic sector. I always used to say, you can live with certain things, but you can't live without food and water. So in these circumstances, this is becoming even more relevant, even more essential, as what we've seen in the past year. So in terms of my presentation, I'm going to be talking about the standpoint of public and development banking. That's what we are involved in. That's the area that we best work with on our day-to-day basis. So when we talk about financial inclusion or exclusion, we look at it from 4 angles. When you look at financial inclusion, you tend to think about poor people, about people who don't have any access to income or due to their economic level. But that's just a portion of the pie, because we actually look at it from 4 different angles when we're looking at financial inclusion and exclusion. So you have financial exclusion, and you, of course, need to work to try to include people who are low income. We also have certain projects that get excluded, certain types of projects that struggle to find financing because they are new activities. For example, renewable energy. Quite recently, nobody wanted to fund renewable energy projects. We had public banking and concessions from development bankings and some financial agencies, some multilateral, bilateral agencies that were doing the funding, and especially that used to happen with environmental projects as well. Then you've got innovative companies that are also struggling to get innovation. And we can see that these companies that are knowledge-based, that don't have assets to back up that loan as collateral, can be very difficult for them to get loans because the banks are not aware of how they work and they struggle with the types of entrepreneurial endeavors that they have, and the types of activities they do.
In terms of territories, if you look at the figures, I didn't want to show that because it's a little bit outdated, 5 or 4 years ago. If you look at how deposits and loans are geographically located in the country, we see that close to 60 to 88% of these resources are either in the capital cities, Santiago, for example, or in the metropolitan region, and maybe one other region. And that is applicable to most countries. And now the issue of the different industries. There are industries that definitely, because of their riskier nature, such as the one we are talking about, especially family farming, which is where we should focus more in terms of the development banking system, is another segment, so to speak, where exclusion is a reality. I'd like to show you some figures based on this Findex global survey that dates back to 2017. This is done every 3 years. It's well known. I don't think it was repeated after 2020. What you see in the case of Latin America, when you consider population with a banking account, it is slightly above Africa. So it's not very good at all. It doesn't change the slide. And if you look at it broken down by country, it's just 4 or 5 countries that are above the average of Latin America, and the rest is way below it. So most of the countries are in a critical situation. Now, in terms of gender, men and women, because women issue is very relevant, it will take even much more force because of how they have been much more greatly affected by the crisis, and many of the development banks are focusing on them, and there's significant concern, not only because of being impacted, but because, as somebody said, it's not a search for vindication. It's because I want to be a role player, because I have the capabilities and the intellectual skills in order to be independent and to manage my own entrepreneurship. This is simple to understand. It's not that they're doing me a favor, but because I have the capabilities beyond gender. And we need to look at that. I have a daughter, and this is the way I see it. I don't see that because of the fact of she being a female, she should focus on things that it's focused on women. If she is capable or intellectually apt, she should be able to do those things. Maybe if we all men had daughters, we would change our opinions more quickly, at least. Now, in terms of loans, of course, it's difficult for somebody to grant a loan to a 15-year-old, but the information that we have is that, and also those who have access to financial products, it's not that much different from what's happening in Africa. It's quite low. Of course, if we exclude 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds that cannot have access to a loan because of legal issues, well, these indicators would be higher, but what matters is the comparison. Now, in the case of rural population, in all countries, the rural sector compared to the overall percentage is way below. In some cases, the differences are huge, but except for some exceptions in which the rural sector has a significant emphasis, but it's just a few cases, Bolivia maybe, Uruguay. And that is understandable because these are countries where there are some areas such as Uruguay, Paraguay, and Brazil and Argentina where they have agriculture exports as a significant history, and maybe that is part of the explanation. Now, when you look at loans in the case of men and women, there's a significant concern there because the differences in favor of men are huge. In some cases, 12 points, 15, 5, 10 points of difference between both genders. That shows, and that is a problem that even in this circumstance, and maybe in some cases has been even worsened. So we need to focus on seeing how we are going to work the development banking system. There is concern. There are directives and programs that had been already in progress before this pandemic. There's something positive. There are many banks that are led today, or the top executive is a woman. So there's a better focus on the support to women. And now more into farming loans in terms of the percentage of the loans in the global financial system, what percentage is going to the agricultural sector. In some countries, it may be small because agriculture has limited presence, but in others, in fact, where agriculture especially is focused on export, because it's an important industry for export, of course, it's slightly higher. I tend to speak very quickly if the interpreters are having trouble in keeping up. You can tell me. I won't be bothered. Okay. Now, if we cross-reference, so this is data from 2016, not very recent, but if we cross-reference the weighting of agriculture on GDP and on financing of the agricultural world, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, Brazil, and Chile, which have important exporting industries based on agriculture, they are the ones that are in those positions. So the question is, what happens with the other countries where they have an important or significant family farming segment, especially the one that concerns us is not so much the agro-export business because there are fewer issues in that sector. Now, I'd like to comment a little bit about the development banks and how they've performed during the crisis. Here I'm showing some charts. One is the crisis of 2008 and 9, and the other one of the recent situation last year. If you look at the chart to the right, blue is negative, which is private banking in the countries, and in red you see public banks, and they all grew in the public sector, and they all went down in terms of their loans and their portfolios in the private sector. There you can clearly see the role, the counter-cyclical or of the development and banking system. Now, when we go to the current circumstance and current crisis, there are countries, the ones that you see as a strange situation or odd, if you wish, is that countries where both public and private banking systems dropped, or the private banking systems that grew more than the public banks. And this is understood by two reasons, because private banks, because of the nature of the crisis, well, they had no other choice but to push on, and they did not restrict their loans. Otherwise, they would kill their customers, and that was even worse. And second, because many countries embarked on very interesting programs, especially guarantees that supported the credits that would be granted either public or private to coming from financial institutions, I believe in Colombia, Brazil, Honduras, and El Salvador, and where in Peru itself, very interesting and broad guarantee programs such as Fiagro, for example, that's one name. I believe they've helped, and there are kind of certain estimates saying that without those programs, instead of increasing those credits, that market would have dropped. So first thing is that private banks were not pro-cyclical, but anti-cyclical, and that helped to lessen the magnitude of this crisis. Now, some data, very quickly. Development banks, public ones, actually grant loans for between 270 to 300 billion. Funding for COVID-19 in 2020 reached $93 billion because they kept providing funding through different paths or deferring payments or restructuring debt or many other mechanisms. In a sample of 66 banks, 71.2% increased their portfolio or average portfolio balance by 21%, and the rest reduced it by 28.8% from 7.4 last year. So the most important banks increased their portfolios. Loans have grown because since it was a short-term loans, maybe sometimes in the balance for the year that is not shown. But when you look at disbursements or loans, well, there are banks that have increased by 150, 120%, or 60% their annual loans. Then, if you only look at farming entities or agricultural entities, that are 33 that fund their strictly focused on agriculture or partially, such as one of the industries they serve, close to 70% of them increase their portfolio balance on average by 19%. The rest, 30%, was reduced by 8.5%. So what you see that is also in this, although some banks did not increase their loan granting, what they did was restructuring, focusing more on the productive sectors that they have refocused from some customers which were not a priority at the time, and now they focused on companies, either rural or urban ones. Now, something that happened today and that we saw is that a problem that the second floor banks have when they have the need to grant loans expeditiously, they find that by depending on financial intermediaries, especially private banking system, it is much more complicated to be quick. So in some countries, what was done was to release them from, or temporarily at least, allowing them to go straight and operate as a first floor bank, as a much more private bank, if you wish, therefore reaching customers with much lower costs. In Colombia, for example, there was a situation in which what they have is a mix of public zero rate, interest rate with public rates. So there's a blend of those two entities, and it's a much lower interest rate. But they found when they funnel those resources to companies or to beneficiaries, it was almost the same as a market interest rate, and they changed for a while. They were allowed to be able to lower their costs.
We already mentioned the pro-cyclical aspect of private banking. Some of these specific actions, you've got 1 minute, please. Only 1 minute, okay. So let me get to the agricultural sector. So initially, there was an emphasis on the logistics aspect of the crisis because they needed to secure supply. And then there was opening of new lines of credit, improving credit conditions, creating specific programs with very friendly rates, and activate or create guarantee systems. Those were all essential actions taken. A lot of subsidies were offered, especially in the area of guarantees. The guarantee system was strengthened, and a lot of work was done with value chains and with suppliers to ensure continuous funding for these companies. I'm going to leave the second part for the Q&A session, some of the more specific products, but if you can just give me a minute, I want to talk about this slide here. I want to talk about the final part of my presentation. What is coming up? Right now is time to rethink agriculture as a strategic sector. We've seen that food has been crucial in this time period. The second thing we need to do is move from credit for working capital to funding for investment. Third, there should be an emphasis on developing products and programs to support entrepreneurial women, as I've mentioned. There's a tendency, and I think this is going to increase, to gamble on sustainable agriculture and to take advantage of the relocation of international companies. We've seen that we can be very vulnerable when we're depending on a supply from a single region. We are going to see support for integration in value chains, as has already been mentioned, and digitalization in financial services, because it has grown enormously in this time period, and I think there's some interesting data that we're going to talk about later on. So thank you for that opportunity to give my presentation. Thank you so much, Mr. Calderon. I understand that with the COVID crisis, some of the figures that you've shown us may have changed significantly, and they will surely continue to evolve. I really liked your presentation about the counter-cyclical actions taken by development banks and the stance of private banking and the reaction of private banking. I find that really interesting. So to continue diving deeper into this topic, we will now hear different models and we will hear from different stakeholders involved in financial inclusion in the rural world in our region. We have a panel for all of you with the members. We've got 4 members. Mr. Diego Castro, who's the lead officer of operations for Rabobank in Chile and Peru, Mr. Luis Levi Tomaszewski, who's the vice president of the savings and credit rural cooperative called Cresol in Brazil, Mr. Claudio Sabat, who's the head of the financial assistance division, and Ms. Daniela Verna Armijo, who is the head of the Management Control and Development Department. And they both come here to us today from INDAP, the Institute for Agriculture and Livestock Development in Chile. As you can see, we have not chosen our panel members randomly. We have a representative from a state entity, which offers financial inclusion instruments. We also have reps from a savings and credit cooperative and from Solidarity Banking for Development. So we have scheduled 2 rounds of questions for our panel members, and we're going to ask each panel member to take 5 minutes to respond to each of the rounds of questions. So I will serve as moderator, and I will also serve as timekeeper. When you've got 1 minute left, I will interrupt you to please wrap up your remarks. So in the first round of questions, the idea is for all of you to share your viewpoint about what are the essential building blocks to make effective financial inclusion viable in our region. And what outcomes have you seen in your institutions and your experiences in the sphere of financial inclusion? What works? And do those experiences have the potential to be replicated and scaled up? So that's our first round of questions. And I will ask Mr. Diego Castro to begin from Rabobank. Mr. Castro, go ahead. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. 5 minutes. Perfect. Thank you so much. Good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. One of the options that we want to talk about at this panel is about the organizational aspect of rural farmers rather than sort of a product-related pathway. It's about financial inclusion based on the organization. And I have a very brief, concrete example, and I want to use it to illustrate some of the benefits of the partnerships that we're working with. A couple of years ago, we started to work with a local community in southern Chile, in a town by the mountains in southern Chile. And they have morchella, a mushroom that grows there. It needs certain soil and climate conditions. And it's not something you can grow. There's a community there that collects it, that harvests it. They gather it. So we were looking at different options to make this business sustainable. And it's not just about financial inclusion, but we were thinking about how to help them make that business sustainable. And in that work we did, we had the idea to form a cooperative. And that's what I want to share in this forum. How the cooperative served as sort of a rural association. And it's really applicable and really appealing for small rural farmers or producers because the collecting activity can be so individual, so there are benefits of associating with each other. The big advantage here was making their business formal, entering the formal sector. So this community used to work informally as kind of local gatherers. So the cooperative that was formed gave them first foot into the formal economic sector, into that door. And there are other benefits of partnerships, such as having synergies. These are more known benefits, shared knowledge, having better governance that allows them to have greater stability. But all of this, at the end of the day, what it allows people to do is to make the agriculture and livestock activity of this cooperative sustainable over time, to make it economically viable and sustainable over time. And thanks to this sustainability, it makes the financial inclusion viable because it makes that community a candidate for credits and loans. That community, thanks to the structure of the cooperative, they now have a pathway paved toward accessing funding or financing. They've got suppliers, they've got customers that might be willing to make advance payments or enter commercial agreements with them. And they can access grants as well from the public sector and work with the private sector, and it also allows for self-financing structures with capitalizing from members of the cooperative itself who might invest. So that's the example I wanted to share. I know it's a pretty extreme example because it was a very financially excluded community. They were gathering mushrooms in southern Chile, and the cooperative served as a structure that was especially useful for this type of agriculture and livestock production. It brought them benefits that made the business attractive and sustainable, and that gave them a foot in the door to financial inclusion. You got 1 minute. And the second portion of the question, we do see it as scalable. You don't have to create anything new. It's a form that already exists. This organization exists, so it is scalable. And we also think that is especially appropriate for agriculture and livestock production because there's so many individual actors working on their own, and sometimes they're not able to get a viable business because they're on their own. And so it makes it something scalable, it makes it something where you can have investment and innovation, and it's a form of association that can help share knowledge and education and promote their business. It isn't creating something new, it's just bringing people together. Thank you so much. That was a really interesting experience. We are going to the Savings and Credit Cooperative in Brazil, Mr. Luis Levi Tomaszewski. Happy to see you again. Please go ahead. Are you with us, Luis? Thanks. Good morning to everyone. Happy to see you. Happy to be here despite the pandemic. I've got 5 minutes, so I want to talk about what we have done in the past couple of years. It's hard to sum up everything we've done in 6 years, but I can share a little bit about our experience with all of you. In Brazil, decades ago, we faced really serious poverty. The rural sector was abandoned by a series of administrations, and the military dictatorship from the 60s and 70s was very problematic. There was a very high level of hunger and poverty in the rural sector. But when the dictatorship came to an end, then a lot of church organizations and progressive organizations tied to rural unions and labor organizations and NGOs, quite a lot of these sorts of organizations sprung up in Brazil. And family farming was really not sustainable, to the extent that these organizations started to move a lot in Brazil to try to offer credit, offer technical assistance, offer fair prices for their products, and try to create more certainty. And it was in 1995 that we started to see some of the early experiences in cooperative credits with the help of international cooperatives. And they had a rotating credit, which was very difficult because the organizations that were providing credit and the farmers that were taking the loans, they were inexperienced in doing that. And so there was a real need to form a credit cooperative. And in 1995, this credit cooperative opened its doors, and then they really started to work in 96. They started to offer credit because we have sort of this idea in Brazil that it's impossible for a family to develop an economic activity if we don't have a credit or a loan. So right now we have lots of organizations and lots of cooperatives, lots of branches. We've got 600,000 members across all of Brazil in 17 departments. We've got 125 branches, and we are helping farmers, and we're helping people involved in other sectors as well. So in response to that first question, in order for us to foster financial inclusion for a family or for a person, we need to do what we've done over these 25 years. We've built up guidelines. It's not just about money and having money to make loans. You need capital. And companies are not going to invest in Brazil if they don't feel confidence and credibility. So it's necessary to have money to lend money. So throughout this time, we've built up sort of a source of funding called Cresol. And another situation we're facing is that is relationships. We need to reach the neediest families, and we need to have engagement, because if we do not have these relationships and this engagement, it's impossible for our employees, for our advisors to be able to approach a family to offer a loan. That loan needs to match the amount needed so that every family is able to develop their business and economic activities, whether you're talking about properties or fostering economic activity.
Uh, I don't know if I have more time. I just had 5 minutes. Thank you. Very specific. You had one more minute, I think. You had 1 minute left. But very interesting to know that you became a very well-known institution in Brazil. I am Brazilian, so I know. And this is based on networking and trust. People is at the center at the business model. So now I'd like to invite our colleagues from INDAP so you can share your views as well. We have two guests from INDAP, but we only have 5 minutes for you. I don't know if you're going to share the time slot or just one of you will present. So Claudio and Daniela, please. Please open your mics and you can share your opinions. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. At INDAP, well, INDAP is an institution, a historical institution, more than half a century. We've been supporting farmers. And in this history, experience and knowledge of INDAP's users is key to be able to cater to them and to provide them with access to financing. Financial inclusion is based on the knowledge we have about our users and the local realities in each one of the regions and geographies of the country. We have almost 140 agencies, which are sort of branch offices of a bank, and we have 160,000 users. We cater to 60,000 of those are women, and 100,000 are men. We grant loans to women, and we support granting loans to women, and that is it's an important part. They are important users for us. We've always thought that in order to achieve financial inclusion that is responsible, sustainable, and meaningful, users must receive technical assistance, both in terms of administrative issues as well as in the specific areas of farming. We do not only leave them just by granting a loan and without any support. We provide them with assistance on an ongoing basis, and that's part of the success we've achieved. Now, since users, usually many of them are not formal in the way they operate, they are not legal entities, they do not keep accounting books. In the case of the new users, we've prepared a process for granting loans based on trust and experience. We start with small loans. When we know the users, we visit them, we get to know their context, if they are renting the land or they own the land, and based on that, we make them loans that grow gradually depending on their needs and also based on time. We have a risk rating system that is based on historical performance, and users know about this, and they are extremely careful, and they adequately pay their loans. We have renegotiation or debt restructuring schemes in those cases in which users are not able to pay. But that is also basically focused on our customers. For us, they're not customers, they are users for us. We have preferred interest rates for them, and we're always open to facilitating the ways in which they can continue to operate in their industry. We have segmented our users depending on their size, depending on their income, whether it's subsistence or it's for livelihoods, or if they are exporters or producers. We have individuals as well as associations or cooperatives. We support the world of cooperatives because that has several advantages: synergies, knowledge exchange, better negotiation positions, and we support them in all aspects and during the life of their businesses. The experience we've had has been, we believe it's been successful. Some of them, because of different reasons, are not able to pay, and we are also contract insurance. We subsidize those insurances for them so that they do not need to, they don't have issues with access to financing. And this is also helpful to them as training or as lessons, so they can resort to the private banking system because they've already had a good history, and they can go to private banks for larger entrepreneurship efforts, or when they do not need state-based funding sources. We believe our role as INDAP is extremely important in this for this type of farmers. Our experience has been quite satisfactory today. There are very large cooperatives that started operating with INDAP many years ago, such as a Pisco distillery cooperative, very well known in Chile and elsewhere in the world. Some of those cooperatives have turned into large businesses, and they started when they were very small many years ago, supported by INDAP. I left 40 seconds to you, Daniela. I don't know if you'd like to. No, that was quite thorough, and I think I can speak in the next round. Thank you. And we are open to share our experience to those who'd like to find out more. We have agreements with JICA, the Japanese Cooperation Agency, and with Paraguay. We provided them with support and advisory, and they've developed a similar system in order to make loans to small farmers. Okay, thank you. INDAP's experience is quite remarkable. This support and advisory to users and provide them support according to their profile. That's very interesting. It even considers the insurance, the credit life insurance that is very difficult for some countries to grant. So we're going to go into our second round. The question is now, based on those experiences that we have heard about, what kind of commitments should be established with different stakeholders in the financial system, in the governments as well, so that countries in the region can promote and to scale up this type of instruments, type of tools? how can you develop financial inclusion mechanisms for those groups that have historically been deprived of these tools? I mean, young population, indigenous peoples, women, very diverse groups that are in territories where they do not have access to government programs, and they face these types of challenges. So that is the question. So you can comment on how, in your experience, countries could um, use this as an inspiration and to scale this up or to replicate this elsewhere. So this is the second round. We're going to start again with Mr. Castro from Rabobank, who is going to have 5 minutes. I'll let you know when you're 1 minute out. Okay, thank you. Once again, uh, going back to the alternative that we support, which is from the point of view of the organization, in this case, a cooperative, we believe
es muy importante la educación y la
that
difusión.
education and the dissemination of the cooperative model is very important as a feasible model, and it's also a sustainable model, but also as an entrepreneurship organizational model. There's cooperatives are thought as a organization, a non-for-profit type of organization, and it's a very good model for the farming industry context. The fact of having small farmers that sometimes by themselves do not have the scale or do not have the means to establish synergy. So dissemination, promotion, and education about this model. And then what Claudio said, I believe it was quite good to reinforce the concepts of advantages of cooperatives. At a first stage of a small cooperative, for example, state involvement is key. For example, in this gatherers community, now the funding is coming from public funds. So at that first stage, it is key to have the state involved, and hopefully that is the kickstart so that the community, that community or that cooperative can get funding from the private banking system because of their own business model. But that involvement of the state is key at the beginning, and then they can also be coupled in the longer term with regulations and more modern legislation focused on cooperatives, making it more flexible for them to get funding, and also systems in which they can withdraw profits depending on what their contribution is. There are some systems in which cooperatives could become more modern and a more entrepreneurial light, if you wish, and consider also partnerships. It has to be a combination of partnerships, but there needs to be a business behind, and it needs to be profitable. So that part, I believe, still can grow a little bit more to couple legislation and regulations so that cooperatives become a more modern tool from the entrepreneurial point of view. And second, from Rabobank, we are supporting the Ministry of Agriculture, providing them with advisory to find development mechanisms for cooperatives. Rabobank is a cooperative, not many of you know it, but it's a cooperative banking institution, and there are all kinds of cooperatives. We're working with this Llanada Grande cooperative, which is very small. There are others that are huge. At some point, all of them have been small when they were starting. So I think they need the support we provide along the way. And I believe the state and the private sector are relevant stakeholders in that support.
Thank you so much. We are now going to ask Luis to continue. It was really interesting to hear about Rabobank's experience with the cooperatives and state participation in the initial phase. I think these are really important elements, and regulation is also key. We heard about that from Diego, and maybe Luis can talk about that. Some of the legal frameworks for cooperatives, which we see in lots of different countries throughout the region. We can see that there's a demand for that in all countries to upgrade the legal frameworks for cooperatives, and it's so necessary for the time we are living in right now in recovery from COVID. The cooperative system can truly serve as a tool for fostering financial inclusion and encouraging collective work toward recovery. So, Luis Levi, please go ahead. Yes, thank you. For us, we are so happy to see that our partners are seeing their income go up. That's an incentive for us to know that we are doing the right thing. When we see the number of partners rise, we can also be sure that the alternatives that we're offering to get credits and loans is doing the right thing. It's being successful. And that's something that is being recognized across society. We have a situation in Brazil which requires us to maintain our positioning as a cooperative. I'm not trying to be critical, but I'm just making an observation. We have two big branches that offer credit in Brazil, and society is kind of looking at them as big banks. And they no longer really feel connected to the communities. So that's a really big challenge for this current generation of advisors and counselors and board members to try to stay as a cooperative, because conventional banking cannot offer the same that we offer. Conventional banking does not have the same commitment to its partners, especially to its smaller partners. We know it's really challenging to keep an institution like a cooperative sustainable with only small partners. I know that it's impossible to work only with small partners. You can feel very limited and restrained. And in the long term, it's very hard to stay sustainable like that. So at Cresol, we are offering credit amounts and loan amounts that are small and medium-sized and even large amounts, because that's going to help us guarantee long-term sustainability for our cooperative. And we're keeping clear focus on remaining a cooperative. A cooperative should stay a cooperative. And that's our commitment at Cresol. And you've talked about a very important situation. It's similar to what we're facing in Brazil. We've made a partnership with some agencies in Peru and with Ecuador as well, and with Uruguay. And the legal framework is a big hurdle. In Latin America, there is no real pattern or template for legal frameworks. The laws are completely different from place to place. And in Brazil, what we're facing is trying to approach the superintendency of our country and the central bank and try to build alongside the central bank adjustments to the legal framework and enforcement framework. And that's going to take time. We can't keep adapting a credit tool or credit mechanism and enforcement and oversight systems from one moment to the next. So it's a process of building. And here in Brazil, we've had a very open approach to the central bank to try to adapt the framework, because at the end of the day, it's the responsibility of the central bank to make those changes, and the superintendency that is in other countries is there to ensure the security of credits, to secure the financial system. And we at the cooperative or the credit cooperative, we cannot be left out of those regulations. We cannot be left out of that system. We have to offer our partners a sense of security from the standpoint that when a credit is offered to a family and then the family develops it, then that money flows back in to where it came from. So the legal framework in our viewpoint is truly a big challenge. We know that there's a legal framework in Peru that we're familiar with. We know in Ecuador as well. And we know that it's truly a challenge. I think exchanges could be very interesting so that we could move forward with more inclusive loan and credit systems. And I also think that technical assistance is also going to be necessary. At Cresol, we have an initiative or a program that offers technical assistance to families that are facing challenges to jumpstart their economic activity. So exchanges and sharing and technical assistance, working closely with other stakeholders involved in local development will all be key. Here in Brazil, we know that credit is a very powerful tool and it's essential to foster development. But we need to work with other actors who are also promoting agro-industrialization and technical assistance and who think in marketing products because it's a full chain so that the credit can truly be effective when it's granted. I think that's the amount of time I had. And I think that's what I wanted to say in my time. Thank you. Thank you so much. Luis, that was a really interesting answer. When you talk about exchanges, about sharing information, that's one of the purposes of the webinar today, to spur that type of exchange and that analysis among those of us who are present here. And hopefully you'll get some ideas to take home with you from this webinar. And we've got our panel members here who are hopefully going to help you get inspired to do the work you're doing back in your territories or your regions. I now invite our INDAP representative to share her vision about scaling up financial inclusion in countries. We'll begin with Claudia so that Daniela has some time. I will try to be brief so that Daniela has time to talk about a program that she leads about financial inclusion among original peoples. I think just as Luis was saying a few moments ago, one way to foster financial inclusion in countries throughout our region is to actively share the knowledge and experiences that we have in all of our countries and to sort of set up working groups that maybe could be replicated, similar to what we're doing with Paraguay. When we talk about cooperation, as we've heard from other speakers, it is essential. We also heard from Luis that we need incentives to remain cooperative, and we incentives incentives, likely some type of law that might offer a tax benefit or a simplified accounting mechanism to make it less complex. And when we're talking about financial inclusion mechanisms for historically excluded groups, I think third-party guarantees are going to be essential, especially for international and state-run funds. They're going to play a very essential role. I will now invite Daniela Verna to take the floor, and she's leading a credit program designed for original peoples in Chile. We have some indigenous groups in Chile, and at the individual and cooperative level, they're offering credit. Thank you, Claudio. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As Claudio said, I am leading the Covine credit program, and Covine is the Indigenous Coverage Program. So Covine is the name of the program, and as its name says, it's designed to fund both individual or associative projects among indigenous or original peoples. The way that we work right now is that we are joined up with other public and private institutions working with the Indigenous Development Program. So we are the top partner of Corfo through the Indigenous Committee, as Claudio said, and guarantees are essential to fund these projects. We know that there isn't a long history there, but there's a big potential for development. And Corfo has its Indigenous Committee that is helping us provide guarantees for credit applications for projects when people are applying to INDAP. These are obviously projects related to agriculture and livestock. And we've funded a wide range of cooperatives. In fact, one of them that we started working with a couple of years ago is now exporting its products. It makes us so proud because it means that they've fulfilled their objective and the program is doing its job. So our cooperation within INDAP is also essential. It's not just about handing over the resources. It's about coaching the people involved in the project and offering technical assistance, and not just on the production side, but also on how to be organized and business administration. It's really essential for their businesses to be successful. And that's why our cooperation within INDAP is also so important, because we're offering not just loans or subsidies, but we're also offering technical assistance, and that plays an essential role in the success of the projects. And just to kind of round off my idea, working together with other institutions has been essential. We work very closely with the Indigenous Committee, which is run by Corfo and the Development Corporation, and we've been working with them since the very beginning. They work at the time that projects are being developed, and they also provide guarantees so that they can apply for loans with their projects and they can be fully backed by teams that have gone out to site to visit those projects to see what it looks like, because a paper application is one thing, you know, it's got a project number, project name, but today, right now, to go see the reality of the indigenous groups, of the cooperatives who are applying with these projects, it's not just about money. It's about applying for comprehensive support for the indigenous community to close the gaps that currently exist socioeconomically. So to cap off what I'm saying, we're very happy with the project. We feel very proud. We think we're playing an essential role in being a financial intermediary for this type of initiative to support productive development in indigenous communities. Thank you so much. Thank you, Daniela. Hearing your experience was very interesting. I think Claudia wanted to add something. Go ahead. I just wanted to add to Daniela's great explanation. We created a specialized department that looks at project assessment. And that department is supposed to evaluate, as its name says, the projects that are applying for loans from these indigenous communities. And what we try to do with that department it's not just a credit granting committee. It's a department that is supposed to look at weaknesses of the project, to address them in a timely fashion, to implement corrective actions, and to cover any weaknesses or any mistakes. And we try to be humble, but there can be mistakes in the project proposals in any of the phases. So that INDAP department did not used to exist. We created it about 3 years ago, and we think it's a responsible way to coach communities. Our intent at the end of the day is for them to be successful, for it to go really well for them, and for us to help Indigenous communities up and down Chile. And we've got lots of different ethnicities. We want them to dare to develop their projects. And throughout the project, as Daniela said, we are there doing technical coaching. We stay with them, we help them, and we work on the productive side, we work on the administrative side, so that they can, in the short term and in the medium term, start to fly on their own and grow, as Diego said. We want those cooperatives to become some of the big cooperatives we've seen happen in Chile. That's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Que realmente el aparato público puede trabajar.
Thank you. That's a good experience. And this shows that the public entities can be flexible, can operate, and can cater to the specificities of the territories in terms of financial inclusion and sustainable development of those communities. Very interesting. And to supplement this idea and to comment on these ideas, extremely valuable ideas, I'd like to offer the floor to my colleague, Carolina Trivelli. She is famous in our webinars already. She's a specialist in rural development of FAO's regional office. She has a vast experience in rural financing, and she's going to comment on financial inclusion and the challenges that entails for the continent. Carolina, you have 10 minutes, and when you're left with only 2 minutes, I will let you know. Okay, thank you. Go ahead. Thank you, Duca, colleagues. It's my pleasure to be sharing this panel with you and to hear your presentations and your experiences. I'd like to start by saying mentioning something that we consider secondary, which is the fact that financial inclusion is so much more than making loans. And we need to make sure that our work from the loan supply should be coupled with a process that it involves massification and diversification of access and use of financial services, but not of any type of service, but the services, as INDAP people said, that are relevant for each reality, for each production project, and for each consumption project, or for each risk management project, or resource interseasonal management. So the challenge of financial inclusion is one that emphasizes very much on access and use of credit, something that you've discussed in detail, in which different stakeholders of the public sector, such as INDAP, of the financial sector, either private or public development entities or private banking entities, or the organized users, which is where we see a huge potential to be tapped into, developing different models that allow to developing the tools that are adequate for the purposes they intended to. And there's so much more to do. But to do that, we need to establish alliances with other financial intermediaries in order for providing insurance services, for capturing savings, and also development banking entities working with cooperatives, small and big, is a winning formula, I would say. Rabobank just confirmed that. Private banking system operating with public systems in order to keep these customers that have already developed their financial capabilities. It is also something that adds scale and sustainability to the efforts conducted by larger entities. So, first message, financial inclusion is, of course, about uh, that those who need a loan to develop their business in the agri business, of course, that is one aspect, but there's so much more, and not always starting with loans is the best idea. When you take a loan, you are taking risk at the same time. If you don't have a good production project that is profitable with repayment capability, it may be becoming a problem that we're transferring to people. So we need to work on technical assistance, productivity enhancements, and an adequate appraisal of the business model that requires financing to make sure that we're providing the resources that that farmer or that trader needs, but not that we are harming them because we are also transferring a risk and an obligation to repay as well. Second message, alliances. It's all about alliances. No intermediary, no matter how good they are, neither the best public entity nor the best private entity or the best cooperative on earth will do it alone. We need to do it systemically, and we need to also uh, have regulators join, either central banks or banking superintendencies, but others should join, ministers of education, so that financial education starts in school, the civil society organizations that should also help make these processes massive. And I would say today, I would call them digital financial skills and capabilities that are needed today to make progress. A third message, alliances within the financial system, within the agri-food system, and beyond, way beyond that. A fourth message is that we're not going to be able to develop credit systems for the agribusiness agri-food system efficiently if we do not take risk away from that agri-food system. It is a risky industry. What we need to make sure is that there will be mechanisms that help mitigate the risk in that industry. Climatic event risks, severe climatic events, pests risks, floods risks that create losses, covariate risks and idiosyncratic risks. And there should be a sector that should be part of this alliance that should work on the massifying the access to risk mitigating mechanisms of both for financial institutions as well as to the credit recipients. That depends on the development of different types of protections. Innovation is making significant progress, but there's still some obstacles to reach out to small farmers. Romy talked about guarantees during the crisis. That has been extremely important when states have become guarantors to enable massive access to credit. They do have an impact on access. They do have an impact on financial products costs, and they also have an impact on business sustainability in the agri-food system. So part of the financial inclusion package should consider a significant focus on the diversification and taking risk away, risk from the agri-food system. And one last message that I want to leave you with during this minutes is about something that Romy Calderon mentioned, and rightfully so in his initial presentation. The reaction we've seen from the development banking system or the private banking system during the crisis in 2020 shows that there's so much more that we can do. But for that to be a reality, much more coordinated action is required among those institutions and economic policy making in the different countries. When states in the region have provided resources to expand credit, they became to fruition and they become significant loan making, not by themselves, with guarantees behind them through intermediaries that already existed and that had been already experienced in that. So there's a major articulation role there, and to rethink issues such as credits or loans for the agri-food system and financial inclusion in the context of economic policies in our countries. This is not something that financial intermediaries will be able to solve by themselves, only operating with the agri-food system. We need supplementary public policy. Something that was not mentioned, but I believe it's key, and is that the emergence or the growth and the development of digital rural finances. Our rural areas that do not have a full connectivity, they do not have all the digital capabilities we would want them to have, but there's a future there that will allow us to cut costs, transactional costs for intermediaries, but especially for users. We will be able to expand the ways in which we supplement financial products, especially loans with services such as technical assistance, to massify insurance schemes, to foster the strengthening of organizations and cooperatives and their financial services with the use of digital financial services. There's a huge potential. It is not a simple or quick fix, but that is a goal we need to think about so that we can ensure that all farmers, producers, traders, and merchants of agri-food products can find those tools they need to grow their business, to make it sustainable, and to improve their practices in the financial sector. So the digital component opens up a very interesting window, and we need to experiment in it, and we need to put it into practice. That takes time. It will bring about maybe some headaches and some mistakes, but we believe we have a possibility to grow and to expand, because what's still lacking, what's still missing in terms of financial inclusion in the region, as Romy said, is scale. We are not covering everyone. We need to cover many more, but also recognizing that we need to have a differential approach to that coverage, as our colleague from INDAP said. And we know that that's possible. And the digital thing can help us in doing that. Thank you, Duca. We could be talking about this for hours. There's so much more to do about this. You're right, Carolina. We are about to close this conversation session today. I'd just like to thank our panelists for their willingness to participate in this session. We've had more than 500 people connected today. We'd like to thank all the people who were with us until the end. This has been broadcasted through the YouTube FAO channel. You're kindly invited to visit our webpage at FAO, where you will find articles and interesting links to other activities that have taken place in the past. And finally, you're all invited to give us your opinion about this webinar in the link that you see at the bottom of the video stream. Thank you. This is the end, and see you next time. Bye-bye.